Whether you're looking at them from a purely lore-based perspective or you observe them as a hobbyist in the tabletop game, it's hard to not find the Tau at least interesting. I'm not saying they have to be your favourite, lower your weapons. They're not everyone's favourite by a mile, and their introduction was certainly less than stellar. Even now, they're still memed for being a hotspot of Asian stereotypes with their somewhat communist philosophies and their giant anime mechs. Even so, to me, the Tau have always offered something different in Warhammer 40,000. As a small, young race in the galaxy, they were never going to take it over, but for a while at least, it seemed they were trying to make it a better place, and not just to paint it in their colour. Now that the truth has been revealed to us, and it seems more and more like the Ethereals are just treating the rest of Tau society like one huge cult, they've become a much more nuanced race, with some even losing faith and striking out to form their own home in the galaxy. One such Tau is Commander Farsight, or Shazo Viola Shova Kais Montir, often shortened to Ushova. Commander Farsight began his life on the Tau Sept world of Viola, where he rose quickly through the ranks of the Firecast warriors. Tau society, you see, is split into different castes, so people know their roles in life from birth. The Firecast, as you can probably guess, produces the warriors and generals of the Tau. Young Ushova quickly proved to be greater than the rest of his junior fire warriors. Both physically and mentally, he was a warrior that was destined for greatness, and his tutors struggled to figure out what to do with him. He was years younger than his fellow pupils and graduated much earlier than expected. At his graduation ceremony, the legendary Commander Puretide was there to watch over the event and take note of this young warrior. Once he was inducted as a warrior, Ushova and his fellow recruits were sent to fight in the Arakan War on the Western Vale. There, the one who would be known as Farsight again managed to impress, earning a great deal of respect from his fellow troopers. He annoyed some commanders though, who decided that for the rest of the campaign he'd be placed on the most dangerous front lines. Either he'd survive and prove himself as the warrior some thought him to be, or he'd be snuffed out. Even with this challenge placed upon him, Commander Farsight performed well for the next 4 years, proving that even if he was arrogant, he had earned the right to believe in his own abilities. By the end of the campaign, it was Ushova who was calling most of the shots for his unit. By the eyes of his superior, it was time for a promotion. Farsight was put in the Trial by Fire, a Tau ritual which allows commanders to pick a test for the warrior in question. Many commanders saw this as a time to get one over on Ushova, and so they placed him in a live-action battle simulation, one that was impossible to win. Farsight died saving a teammate in the simulation, and was pulled out with disappointment in his heart. Only then was he told that by dying, he'd passed the test, and was fit to pilot a battlesuit. The war for the Western Vale wasn't yet over though, and so, with a shiny new broadside battlesuit, Farsight once again stepped into the fray of battle. Commander Dawnstone led the Tau forces into a final push. This battle was hard fought. Farsight lost most of his left leg, but performed well enough that he earned yet another promotion, and was put in charge of bringing the final blow to the Arakan by killing their leadership and leaving them lost. This is what happens when you don't join the glorious Tau Empire, I guess. The assassination was successful, and like a snake without a head, the Arakan slithered off, leaving the Western Vale for good. However, even in victory, the Tau nearly lost their hero. During a boarding of an Arakan ship, Dawnstone was caught off guard. Farsight sacrificed himself to save the commander, and ended his story before it could fully begin. Thank you for watching. This has been Commander Farsight. I'm just kidding. Farsight awoke in a medbay sometime later, where it was revealed to him that the operation was just another simulation, and that again, Farsight had vastly exceeded the expectations set upon him, and he was even fit to be a disciple of the legendary Commander Puretide. The training Farsight was put through was grueling under Commander Puretide, and every day was a test like no other. But through that training, Ushova mastered the art of war in every form. He even went to every Earthcast presentation that he could to learn more about military equipment and its uses. This was seen as a warning sign for some, as Farsight could have easily been seen as between spheres or stepping into another caste, something that's strictly forbidden by the Ethereals and Tau Society. As we'll see later on, Farsight and the Ethereals don't always see eye to eye, but for the most part he would serve them as he served the Tau people overall. But, with his training complete under Puretide and his broadside battlesuit, Commander Farsight stepped into the field of battle once more. His first great victories were earned in the Arkanasha War, where the Tau were threatened by the Wa, of Warboss Toothjaw. Outnumbered massively, things looked dire for the Tau colonists, but Farsight managed to think ahead of the Orcs, using his small numbers to leave them chasing shadows, forcing them to pursue the Tau into the canyons and the deserts of the environment. Once isolated, Farsight would destroy any Orcs he could, boxing off and eliminating their massive army bit by bit. For his ability to predict the Orcs' movements before they made them, Farsight earned his moniker. Through his battles against the Orcs, who often charged into the fray of melee with the choppers held high, Farsight believed the town needed to improve their own close quarters capabilities. Unlike most commanders, he encouraged getting stuck into the mess of melee and proved exceptionally capable in it. Orcs proved to be nothing more than a test for Farsight though, as his next major conflict came in the Damocles Crusade, where Tau space was threatened by the Imperium of Man. Farsight proved himself to be more than an astute commander during this war, as his people looked to him as a beacon of hope. As a young commander, he came up against the Scarlord Space Marines and his old rival, Chapter Master Kalos. Even though the Chapter invaded the Tau world of Viorlos, they found no easy work once they landed. 90% of them were lost to Farsight's counterattack, and they were roundly defeated. He was nearly bested during this conflict though by Cato Sicarius and Jorus Numenor, but managed to escape with his life. The Damocles Crusade is a huge conflict, and could be a video in itself if I wanted to, but essentially the Imperium comes in, manages to take a few worlds, but is then pushed back by the Tau. It could have destroyed the entire Tau race if needed, but the Imperium would have needed many more troops than it could spare, and so the Tau were left alone for a while. Farsight's fight didn't end there though, as he had to reclaim the planets that the Tau had lost. This proved to be an easy task, as the only Imperial inhabitants were abandoned guardsmen and deserters. Following that, Ashova set out with his fleets to explore, in the hopes of finding any enemies of the Tau before they could show up on their doorstep. The Farsight expedition, as it would be known, was also a morale booster for the Tau. Following a bunch of super buff spacemen making short work of your people, you're probably going to need a quick shot of adrenaline to make it feel like you're not just going to get destroyed by the other forces in the galaxy. Farsight's fleet in the expedition was enormous, and was enough to compensate for the Tau's losses in the Crusade. It was sent across the Damocles Gulf, and most of the Tau aboard were put into stasis so they wouldn't age on the trip. Tau don't live much longer than humans really, and so it's important that they keep their best alive for centuries through this advanced tech. The Farsight expedition wasn't just so Ashova could collect rock samples and send the Ethereals a postcard though. As is the case wherever you go in the galaxy, Farsight ran into Orcs eventually, a warband under the control of Grog Ironteeth. Ironteeth actually managed to best Farsight early on, but our hero defeated him in time, pursuing his scattering forces across space and eventually finding a large group of Orcs on the world of Arthas Moloch. On that planet, there was something far more terrifying than Orcs. Chaos demons emerged from a mysterious portal, slaughtering the Ethereals that accompanied Farsight. It seemed that the rest of the expedition would have followed suit had Farsight not discovered the Dawn Blade there in the ruins of Arthas Moloch. Using the blade, he shut the portal and butchered the demons in kind. However, it seemed that Farsight enjoyed this killing a bit too much. We'll get into that later, but for now, Farsight's world, his universe, had come crashing down. The Ethereals had kept Chaos and its demons secret from Farsight, something that caused him to question his faith in them. After this incident, he returned to his newly captured worlds on the far side of the Damocles Gulf. He grew distrustful of the Ethereals, suspecting that they were controlling the Tau, not just being their benevolent leaders. Farsight essentially becomes a conspiracy theorist during this time, as he also questions Tau philosophy. If something such as chaos can exist, then the galaxy cannot be an orderly place, as Tau teachings would suggest. The Ethereals had known this, and yet had kept it a secret. Farsight initially thought of his leaders as flawed, but over time he judged them incompetent, foolish, and dangerous. They had taken actions against the greater good, and had done so consistently to maintain their own hold on the Tau. Farsight pondered these matters for many years. Without stasis, he still lived for hundreds of years, which seemed surprising to most. For us in the know, we could point at that suspicious-looking blade and probably see why Farsight wasn't dying or aging. But with time came more doubts, and Farsight was presented with two options. Either he stays silent and returns, or he reveals the truth to his people, one that would surely take them back to the civil wars that ravaged the Tau before the Ethereals came along. Farsight chose a third, unknown option: exile. He would remain in his own Farsight enclaves, but he would not send the Tau down the dark road of civil conflict. Just because Farsight had chosen a life separate from the Tau didn't mean he wouldn't be noticed. The ethereal Envar heard of the death of his fellow ethereals and Farsight's new enclave and ordered that the commander return immediately. Farsight did not return as he was ordered, and instead he reinforced his worlds in the enclave and separated himself from the ethereals. It was reported to the Tau outside of the enclaves that Farsight was dead, and he was mourned as a hero. Farsight didn't even stay in the enclave for long. Once he'd established them and made sure they wouldn't be easily taken by the rest of the Tau, he left, declaring himself unworthy after the experience of Arthas Moloch. He abandoned his battlesuit and the Dawnblade and left for a life of solitude. Unknowingly, Farsight had saved himself from the corruption of Khorne and Tzeentch by doing this, as they'd both been trying to claim his soul from the day of Arthas Moloch. This isn't where we end Farsight's story, as he would return when the Tau needed him most. When the Enclaves were attacked by the Tyranid Hive Fleet Kraken, he led 80 battlesuits to drive them back. When the Imperium returned to Tau space, he teamed up with Commander Shadowsun to plot a resistance against the forces of man. Shortly after, he tried to rescue the planet Talassa from Hive Fleet Leviathan. As well as supporting the Enclaves, Farsight had also aided the Tau Empire at large, but despite this, the Ethereals still ordered Shadowsun to capture him. Out of respect for her fellow commander, Shadowsun informed Farsight of this before she followed the order, so he had time to escape. We pick back up with Farsight's story with quite a recent entry, as he was featured in one of the Arcs of Omen books, where we find him once again knee-deep in greenskins, fighting against the Orc war boss Nazdrag, who pushed Farsight into coming within close proximity of Arthas Moloch as he tried to attack the Orcs' base on the nearby world of Dregok. The fight against the Orcs was successful, but afterwards a portal opened, and from it came Ughalax, the Demon Prince and the Arc of Omen Unhallowed. They were seeking a key fragment on Arthas Moloch. Farsight hoped he could lead the Orcs and Chaos forces into destroying one another on the planet, but this plan ended with the Tau caught between the two. One of Farsight's most trusted allies, Brightsword, was killed during this battle, and 2 more were badly injured. Matters grew worse when the Tau Empire refused to aid Farsight, and so the commander began to give in to his rage, to allow the workings of Khorne to overcome him. At the Great Star Dais, where Farsight had first closed the portal so many years ago, this time he opened it with enemy blood, unleashing demons on both the armies of Chaos and the Orcs. As Khorne took hold of him, Farsight turned into something else. His battlesuit grew to be the size of a titan, his weapons gave way for one giant axe, and his armour was littered with ethereal skulls. He had become the perfect killing machine, and all of his men were too weak to follow him. In that moment, when he stood on the knife edge between corruption and salvation, Farsight managed to draw himself back to normality. Casting aside the gifts of Khorne, he retreated with his men, saving as many of them as possible and leaving the other forces to destroy one another. Later, he would return to the world, finding it free of chaos and teeming with organic life. As the Tau move away from being just boring blue good guys and more towards a sinister society where the people unknowingly live on the brink of civil war, Farsight remains in the middle of it all. He's a lot of people's favourite Tau, as he does away with a lot of what makes them quite cringe. I've not managed to go over every part of his character. Things like the 8, for example, haven't been touched, and that's because I like to keep these things quite short. A jumping off point for a character, if you will. Hopefully I've managed to show off Farsight in all his glory, but let me know if I miss anything and what you want to see next. Until then, I guess all that's left to say is peace and love, ghouls and gals, and if you do find some sort of magical looking sword on the ground in the ruins of an ancient planet, maybe don't pick it up. It's probably more trouble than it's worth.